history of football, there have been villains, there have been geniuses, and there have been players who walked the fine line between brilliance and madness with such consistency that the sport never quite knew whether to celebrate them or condemn them. But there has only ever been one Luis Suarez, a player so gifted, so ruthless, and so utterly impossible to ignore that every single thing he did, on the pitch and off it, divided opinion in a way that no other footballer of his generation managed to replicate.
Dances to the defenders and scores a brilliant goal!
Luis Suarez bit 3 separate opponents in professional matches. He was found guilty of racially abusing an opponent. He handled the ball on the goal line to deny Ghana a place in a World Cup semi-final and celebrated while a nation wept. And yet he was also, at his peak, the most complete and most devastating striker on the planet. A player capable of moments so beautiful and so technically extraordinary that the same people who had condemned him 24 hours earlier found themselves standing and applauding. Here at Goal Line Stories, where we go beyond the score lines to find the stories that truly define the beautiful game, subscribe if you haven't already, because the story of Luis Suarez is not simply the story of a controversial footballer. It is the story of a deeply complicated human being whose hunger, whose genius, and whose demons were all products of exactly the same place, and whose career remains one of the most fascinating and most uncomfortable stories that football has ever produced. Luis Alberto Suarez Diaz was born on January 24, 1987, in Salto, Uruguay's second-largest city, into a family of 7 children whose financial situation was so precarious that when his father abandoned the family while Luis was still a young boy, the already fragile foundations of their daily life threatened to collapse entirely. Football was not a hobby for young Luis. It was an obsession so complete and so all-consuming that it functioned as both an escape from the poverty and instability around him and as the only realistic path toward a future that looked nothing like the present he was living in. He was not the most naturally gifted child at his local club. He was not the fastest, not the tallest, not the most technically polished. But he had something that coaches and scouts and experienced football people recognize immediately when they see it and almost never see in a player so young, which was a hunger so fierce and so deeply personal that it bordered on desperation, a need to win and to score, and to be the best that came not from confidence or arrogance, but from a place of genuine fear. Fear of going back, fear of failure, fear of becoming another statistic from another broken family, in another struggling South American city that the football world would never hear from. That fear never left Luis Suarez. Not when he reached the top of the game. Not when he had won everything. It stayed with him and drove him and ultimately defined him in ways both magnificent and deeply destructive. Suarez's rise through European football was rapid and extraordinary. From Groningen in the Netherlands to the Amsterdam club, where he became one of the most feared strikers in European football and announced himself to the wider world with a combination of technical brilliance, relentless work rate, and a finishing ability that was simply not supposed to exist in a player of his age and background. Liverpool signed him in January 2011 for £23 million, and what followed over the next 3.5 years was one of the most electrifying and most controversial individual performances the Premier League has ever witnessed. In his first full season, he scored 31 goals. In his second, he scored 32 and was named the Football Writers' Player of the Year and the Professional Footballers Association Player of the Year simultaneously, the first player in Premier League history to win both awards in the same season. He formed a partnership with Daniel Sturridge that was so devastatingly effective, so instinctive and so perfectly balanced that Liverpool came within 2 points of winning the Premier League title in 2014 in what remains one of the most emotionally wrenching near misses in the history of the club. But even as Suarez was producing football of such consistent and such breathtaking quality that the entire sport was running out of superlatives to describe it, the controversies were accumulating with a frequency and a severity that made it increasingly impossible for anyone to discuss his football without simultaneously discussing everything else that came with it. The controversies came in 3 distinct and increasingly shocking waves. and each one was more damaging and more difficult to defend than the last. The first bite came in November 2010 at Ajax, when Suarez bit PSV Eindhoven's Otman Bakal during a match and received a 7-game ban that the football world treated as a shocking aberration, the kind of inexplicable moment that happens once in a career and is never repeated. The second bite came in April 2013 at Anfield, when Suarez sank his teeth into Chelsea defender Branislav Ivanovic's arm during a Premier League match that was being watched by millions of people on live television. An incident so extraordinary and so completely indefensible that it dominated every sports broadcast and every newspaper front page for days afterwards, and resulted in a 10-game ban that Liverpool's then-manager Brendan Rodgers publicly described as excessive. And then came the World Cup in Brazil in June 2014, the biggest stage in football, the eyes of the entire world watching. And Luis Suarez bit Italian defender Giorgio Chiellini on the shoulder in a moment so brazen and so almost incomprehensibly ill-timed that it produced a global reaction of pure disbelief. A collective what just happened from billions of people watching simultaneously that has never quite been replicated in the history of the sport. FIFA banned him from all football activity for 4 months. Uruguay were eliminated, and Suarez flew home from Brazil having reduced one of the greatest individual tournament performances of the modern era. He had scored 2 goals against England. He had carried Uruguay on his back to a single act of madness that overshadowed everything. But the biting incidents, as extraordinary and as damaging as they were not the only controversy that defined Luis Suarez's complicated relationship with the sport he loved. In October 2011, Suarez was found guilty by an independent Football Association panel of racially abusing Manchester United defender Patrice Evra during a Premier League match at Anfield, using a word that Evra found deeply offensive, and that Suarez, in a defense that satisfied almost nobody outside Uruguay, claimed was used in his home country without racist intent. The 8-game ban that followed, and Liverpool's deeply uncomfortable handling of the situation, which included players wearing t-shirts bearing Suarez's image in a show of solidarity that the club later acknowledged was a mistake, damaged the reputation of one of England's most respected football institutions in ways that took years to fully repair. And then there was the handball against Ghana at the 2010 World Cup in South Africa. Suarez deliberately blocking a goal-bound shot with his hand on the goal line in the final seconds of extra time, receiving a red card, and then celebrating on the touchline as Asamoah Gyan stepped up to take the resulting penalty and struck the crossbar, sending the match to a shootout that Uruguay won. Ghana were eliminated. An entire continent felt robbed. And Suarez stood there and smiled, because he had done what his hunger and his desperation and his absolute refusal to accept defeat had always driven him to do. Whatever it took to win, consequences be damned. But here is the uncomfortable truth about Luis Suarez. Genius has always been forgiven in ways that ordinary talent never is. The move to Barcelona in the summer of 2014, just weeks after the World Cup bite that had apparently ended his reputation forever, produced a chapter of his career so magnificent and so consistently extraordinary that it forced the football world to confront an uncomfortable truth about itself, which is that genius has always been granted a tolerance that ordinary talent is never afforded, and that Luis Suarez's genius was of a kind so rare and so overwhelming that it made tolerance feel not just understandable, but almost inevitable. At Barcelona, alongside Lionel Messi and Neymar, in the most feared attacking trio the sport had seen since the days of the great Dutch and Brazilian sides, Suarez won La Liga, the Champions League, and the Copa del Rey in his first season, a treble that announced his arrival at the very highest level of club football in the most emphatic way imaginable. He scored 198 goals in 283 appearances for Barcelona. He won La Liga 4 times. He formed a partnership with Messi that was so instinctive and so perfectly complementary that coaches and analysts are still studying it today, trying to understand exactly how 2 players could combine with such devastating effectiveness over such a sustained period of time. The later chapters of his career, Atletico Madrid, the return to Nacional in Uruguay, the move to Inter Miami, and the brief emotional reunion with Messi, were the chapters of a man slowly and gracefully making peace with the end of something extraordinary. A player whose body was finally beginning to catch up with the decades of punishment he had put it through in his relentless pursuit of goals and victories, and the validation that his childhood self had always needed so desperately. Luis Suarez retired in 2024, having scored over 500 career goals, a number that places him among the greatest strikers the sport has ever produced, in company so elite that only a handful of players in the entire history of football can stand alongside him. Whether you loved him or hated him, whether you celebrated his genius or condemned his behavior, the one thing that nobody who watched Luis Suarez play football can honestly say is that he ever made them feel nothing. And in a sport that produces more than enough players who inspire exactly that reaction, that is perhaps the most honest and most fitting tribute of all. Here at Goal Line Stories, this is exactly the kind of story we exist to tell. Complicated, human, and impossible to look away from. If this story made you think, subscribe to Goal Line Stories right now, because we publish new documentaries every single week. This has been Goal Line Stories, and we will see you in the next chapter.